The US is presented with a crisis, too much debt, and the clear and obvious promise to continuously enter into a deeper state of perpetual debt slavery. When you look beyond this particular nation's borders, you quickly realize this is a global issue, one which is not being resolved. Eventually, every issue must be resolved either through slow and steady progress or with great misery. If we flip back into the pages of history, we'll find we are simply repeating cycles over and over again. The world has already passed the peak for this cycle. And if you're afraid of heights, don't look down, because that's where we are headed. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. A bunch of different topics to cover today. Let's get into it right away. This global economy is certainly at a critical level right now. And you have seen the price of oil obviously taken down significantly. Oil prices will take decades to recover and will still not reach the peak seen in recent years. That's according to the World Oil Outlook from OPEC. Now, OPEC obviously has a stake in this, and they decide what the prices of oil should be. I do believe there's all sorts of manipulation going on, whether that's through propaganda like this, or whether that is directly with the prices involved and the producers and the countries and everything all interconnected with that. But it's still interesting to read what they have to say. And the group's latest outlook on supply, demand, prices to 2020 and 2040, OPEC predicted that a barrel of oil would cost, in real terms, around $70 by 2020 and $95 by 2040. That's a far cry from the high point that we saw before. First, would like to note the fact that that isn't much higher than where it is today, considering all other assets and cycles that do go on over the next decades. We definitely would expect to see a much higher price than that, even if you just factor in inflation, for example. But they're saying that the prices will be subdued. This really goes against, if there is any growth in the global economy, that oil would obviously be in high demand regardless. So they also mentioned prices began to plunge on oversupply. There is that talking point again that continuously gets mentioned. I'm always seeing that. In fact, every time to talk about oil, any article, any book, whatever you have, that's referring to this most recent drop in oil, saying, look, it's an oversupply, and that's just the way it is. When you have too much of a supply, the price drops. Absolutely in real terms, but we're talking here about a much, much deeper situation. During the financial crisis, we had what, let's say, was the predecessor to that, the housing crisis. More lenders are reporting easing credit standards, according to Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae obviously being interconnected in with this because they were giving out loans, ninja loans, no incomes, no jobs or assets, to people who obviously should not have had it. No, interest-only loans and all these really silly things that were happening. And now what are they doing? After that crisis, after the financial crisis, subprime crisis, all the derivatives that are interconnected with that, it was a real big mess. So what do they decide to do? Well, they're going to ease credit standards. That means give loans to people who shouldn't have it in the first place. They expect standards to ease rather than tighten in the near future. And absolutely, you need to, get a bubble to be pumped up. What do? You do exactly what they do in the Canadian housing market, is that keep interest rates as low as possible and basically make it very easy for people to get into it, not necessarily the pricing, but borrowing money, making that easy. And people will not want to put their money in the banking system simply because they're not going to get any return. So they believe, well, I'll just take out more debt and we can do it this way. Right here, they're just basically going on to more talking about this, but they're saying it's across all loan products. So this will be a mess that we can expect in the future. It's already bad as it is. Now, China, moving over to China here, there's a couple articles that I want to talk about. First is a most recent one from December of 2015. Head of China Telecom taken away, that's a quote, as probe launch. So we have one of the nation's big three telecom firms, China Telecom, under investigation for severe disciplinary violations. This individual, they say he was guilty, and they're going to obviously have a little talk with the individual, let's just say that, and this is probably not going to end very well for him. But what I would like to say, and actually let me move on to the next article. I did some research on this, found many cases, in fact, of a similar instance, and this happens to be at China Mobile, one of the country's biggest state-owned telecommunications companies, sentenced to death. And they said that the sentence means with good behavior, the executive's penalty could be commuted to life in prison. Wow, lucky him. So what I would say is that, there are instances where this kind of thing happens. But when you have such a high-level individual, whether that is in China or the US or anywhere around the world, these high-level individuals are protected by the government and those who control the government. They are not acting on their own for the most part. They are taking orders. That's why they're in these positions in the first place, particularly with state-owned enterprises. So I have to believe that perhaps these individuals got out of line, and that's what's going on here. Keep your eyes on all this. I believe it's very important. Switching gears over here, staying with China, but I just want to get more into how we consume so much debt on the national level. In the case of this, from my book, in the case of Evergreen Solar, they were given $43 billion in taxpayer money for their businesses, and they became one of the top solar panel manufacturers in the US. Good for them. They got government grant, they started building, and obviously solar power, very important for the future. They have since laid off all of their employees and moved to do business in China. Well, isn't that just great? So you want to make more profits for the company, simply move them over to China. The manufacturing is much more cheap there. And then I said basically the jobs are moving overseas permanently. And that's what we are seeing today as the jobs are being displaced. So where are the people in countries like the US going to get money to buy the solar panels that are being purchased or are manufactured in China? So we have a very, very big crisis ahead of us right here. This is just one small example of that. As we look at this article out of the New York Times, we're talking about China and their municipal debt risks. A report is basically talking about China's municipal debt being a major concern for the country's economy. So we're not talking about just the nation itself and how China was easing lending standards as well. They all mirror each other. This municipal debt grew at an alarming 39% in recent years. The financing vehicles used by local governments to raise cash had created debts totaling at least 19 trillion renminbi, that's $3 trillion, by the end of last year, and posed a major risk to the economy. Any debt poses a major risk, but that's what they do. They all consume too much debt. They will say that they owe it to themselves, therefore not a problem. So you decide for yourself. However, you know that where there is debt, there is risk, and that risk is going to increase the fragility of the economy, and it's not going to end well. Let's look at this here. Something very different, but I wanted to talk about it. This reminds me a lot of Operation Fast and Furious, and that had to do with guns. It had to do with Mexico and the drug cartels. And here's another instance of something very similar, tracing drug dollars to Venezuela, how drug money got from the streets of New York to the account of the top aide of the Venezuelan president. So I'll just quickly cover what happened here. Number one, cops posing as money launderers pick up bags of drug cash in New York City. The money is flown to Bal Harbour in the Florida, right at the Miami, essentially. It is counted in a police trailer and deposited at SunTrust. And then moving on to number 4, from SunTrust, it's wired to a bank back in New York City. And then it's wired to the account of William Amaro. That's an aide to Nicolas Maduro. And that's in Panama. And what we have here is illegal activity done by those in the government. This continues to go on. And the reason I mention this, it is one particular case, but other things like this have happened before. But this type of thing isn't done by rogue agents, as the movies like to say. These are high-level officials who give the type of order so that drugs and drug money can be used. So just as the drugs, they come in, they make their way into the nation so that people end up taking the drugs so that they have reasons to put people away for non-violent crimes. At least that's part of it. But at the same time, you could make some people very, very rich. Let's move on to this here. I did a video recently that some of you were very excited about, but this is it. Man walks off a cliff and plummets 60 feet to his death on Christmas Day while distracted by his cell phone. This is what I'm talking about. This is the reason I did the video. People are distracted. People are not in their right frame of mind. You see the people, I did it in a silly way, this video, but I tried to show how people are so focused on technology, and technology is amazing, but they're so focused on it that they don't separate from reality. I see people all the time downtown Toronto. They're halfway faced against a wall in the middle of nowhere, essentially, and they don't realize where they are because they're typing on their phones. So they lose the ability to control their body because they've basically connected into this virtual reality system. And we have only hit the tip of the iceberg on where this is all going. You've seen the articles, you've seen the documentation that I've covered here and elsewhere, I'm sure you've seen. It's not going to get any better. This is very scary to me, because how are we ever going to take on all of this tyranny that's taking place right now when people can't even focus for 2 seconds on anything that's important? That's all I wanted to mention for this video. If you found it informative, please give me a thumbs up. And last but not least, if you found the video informative, I know you'll find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. If you head over to Amazon, they have this look inside feature, which allows you to flip through the book and see if you like it. Take care.